You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Mamamia Out Loud! Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud. What women are actually talking about on Monday, the 6th of November. I'm so excited. You'll see why in a minute. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman, but who cares about me?
And I'm Jessie Stephens and I'm back.
Yay!
I'm so excited to be back.
If you don't know what we're talking about, if you're new to Out Loud, Jessie Stephens, our esteemed co-host, has been on maternity leave. She has been raising a baby. She continues to raise the baby.
I was going to say, she's finished raising it now.
Yeah, 4 months.
4 months.
Done.
She is gone. I'm done.
Cool.
I am back on the podcast. You can raise yourself. So I am back, horrified by some of the discussions that have occurred while I've been gone and how wrong everyone was, as I'm sure a lot of listeners were.
Yes.
I was just going, this is why they need me.
Did you listen and shout at home?
Often. Claire often, because I felt like she should be my mouthpiece. So I was most angry with her most of the time, just going, that's not our opinion. That's not where we take that. Look, I thought I would have to really support Claire through this whole thing. Turns out the Out Louders loved her, and I think I'm going to need the support coming back.
So true.
And
I'm happy she's gone.
I'm sure they're all very happy you're back too. I saw a lot of like, we love them both. And I'm like, well, you can't have two. Don't be greedy.
You can only have one at a time.
On the show today, the headmaster of a prestigious Sydney school who called a killer an absolute delight, and the problem with the good bloke myth. Also, what Louis Theroux has to teach us about how to ask people those questions you're really not supposed to. And, as discussed, our Jessie Stephens is officially now a working mother. So what has she learned in her 4 months of maternity leave? But first...
So I recently learned about this ritual that women do, and it's called the everything shower, okay? And I mean everything.
In case you missed it, the everything shower is having a moment. And most people probably understand what I mean when I use that phrase. The everything shower is when you find yourself with a good 30 minutes and decide that it's time to scrub and treat and shave and scrub again and leave in and put some goo on the things, on the teeth maybe, and a mask somewhere else. And you don't know what any of it really does, but it's all part of the everything shower.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I discovered recently that my vibrator is waterproof.
Oh, is this a new...
Is that part of the everything shower? Do people use them in the shower?
I haven't heard that, but I will say, I'm going to say it, the farmers. We don't want to be wasting our water too much with you and your vibrator in the shower. Unless you can do it quickly, unless 15 seconds in and out.
Look, for some women, I imagine that's the
are you?
only time they get to be alone.
Well, I have an issue with the running water and the vibrator because it could take some time. And someone's got to be the voice of the farmers on this podcast.
We do need to have an eye on our water consumption. Mia Freedman.
Sorry. Anyway, back to the everything shower.
The everything shower, I will say, sometimes my everything shower is a bath as I feel like it's more water efficient.
Yeah.
But
love that.
the everything shower, it's gone viral on TikTok. It's been referred to as a moment of luxury. And users are sharing things like the best products to use from oils and scrubs and razors and gels, how to use them and in which order. Apparently this is very important, the order of the using of the things.
Once I get in the shower, washing my hair completely. And then I put my conditioner on my hair. And then what I'll do is I'll go in with my Dr. Teal sugar scrub and exfoliate. And I'm talking everywhere.
Mia, what is part of your everything shower other than your waterproof vibrator?
It is obviously a wash and a condition and a hair mask and a leg shave to me. I mean,
yeah, right.
I was disturbed that the everything shower includes washing yourself because I thought that was the purpose. I tend to do that in all my showers, To me, it's the everything shower is shaving the legs.
I think that it's saying, though, that you wash your whole body because for me, like my shower this morning, I do underarms, do bits, but I'm not washing my forearm and I'm not washing.
Do you turn around to make sure all the bits of you get wet?
Sorry.
Remember
Yes.
when we did an article once on Mamamia about did you wash your legs?
Yes.
And everybody got very upset because they're like, of course you wash your legs. And I was like,
I don't specifically wash my legs, but I do in the everything shower.
When you say underarm and bits, do you mean you shave your underarms and your bits?
No, I wash them with soap.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
Holly, what do you do in your everything shower?
Look, I'm going to be the martyr who says I don't have everything showers. Who has 30 minutes for a shower?
Oh, you're busier than everyone else, Holly.
I'm winning the busy Olympics around here. But the truth of it is I don't like showers very much. I like baths. I don't have one. So my body is in rack and scaly ruin.
I still haven't recovered from the fact that you don't own a shower cap. That's
I don't own a shower cap. I just put my hair in a bun and keep my head out of the way.
Same.
Like that's just normal, isn't it?
6 women were murdered by intimate partners over the course of 10 days this month in Australia. And if that's not a national crisis, it's hard to know what is. As Annabelle Crabb once pointed out about the shocking number of women who die by domestic violence every week, that if sharks were responsible for the same death toll, we would be draining the ocean. And when people feel equal parts furious and despairing, things said publicly can cause a huge backlash, even if they weren't intended to. And that's what's happened to a school principal in Sydney this week. John Collier used to be the principal of the school attended by the man who murdered 21-year-old Lily James. Both Lily and the man who murdered her both worked at the school. It was called St Andrew's College. They were both sports coaches there. And John Collier is now a headmaster at a different high school, a boys' private school called Shaw. And this week he wrote something in the newsletter that has caused a huge outcry. I'm not going to read the entire newsletter, it's very long, but I wanted to say that we didn't want to just react to the backlash, we wanted to go back to the source material and read it in the context. I'll just read you a little bit of what he said and a little bit more than you may have read in coverage of this situation. He wrote, "What is chilling about the tragedy which unfolded at St Andrews, the shock and grief of which will cascade for a long time, is that the young man concerned was, in everybody's estimation, an absolute delight. I knew him years ago as a fine student, a prefect, a role model. This is what makes the situation chilling, in that on every indicator he appeared to be just like the best of us. An hour before he committed the atrocity, he was speaking in a relaxed, friendly mode with staff at that school. Now 2 young lives are destroyed in their prime. 2 families have had their lives upturned in the most blistering manner in a way which will never really recede, and multiple friends, relatives and staff in 2 schools have been left in deep turmoil. He was not a monster. Rather, in the last 5 hours of his life, he committed a monstrous act, which was in complete contradiction to what everyone who knew him observed in the rest of this short life." He then goes on to ask what led to his mental disintegration, and he suggests maybe it was pornography. Anyway, it sort of goes on and talks a lot about God. Holly, this really goes to the heart of what you wrote about last week, and that's the good bloke myth. Can you explain what that is and what you said?
There is a mode of reporting that is often activated when there's a death like this. Domestic violence advocates and activists hate it, and it's called good bloke reporting. And it's often that it will immediately come out that the perpetrator was a lovely guy who was a good dad, pillar of the community, had lots of friends, all these things. And people get very upset about it because it does seem to often suggest the narrative that he was clearly driven to this by something external, and often the suggestion is a woman. The woman that he killed must have somehow tainted this man's brain and tortured him in some way, driven him to distraction through jealousy or rejection or whatever. That's the arc of the narrative that people really hate.
I'd never connected those dots.
Yes, because that's often what the kind of narrative is saying is it's like, it's very out of character.
Right.
I mean, what did she do to him, right? That's kind of the subtext.
And he had one bad moment.
I never read it like that. I always read it like you never know who's capable of this.
This is interesting because when I wrote the article I wrote not long after Lily James's death, it was called Another Good Bloke. And part of it was along the lines of what Dr. Collier is saying, because I was making the point that monsters don't look like monsters and that men who kill women can be like golden-headed boys at fancy schools, and they can also be drug-dealing bikies, and they can also be suburban accountants, right? You said before about the 6 women who've been murdered in these past 10 days. One was in a New South Wales mining town. One was in a fancy hotel in the middle of Perth. One was in central Victoria. One was in a beach suburb in Adelaide. And one of them, obviously Lily, was at a prestigious school just a short walk from where we're sitting now, right in the middle of Sydney. So the point is this happens everywhere and it touches everybody. And yes, there are some groups who are overrepresented when it comes to family violence, like First Nations women are much more likely to be victims and be hospitalised with it. But it is not a problem that is isolated to a few crazed monsters. And so I think the reason that people are angry with what Dr. Collier said is, first of all, the reporting that's come out since Lily's death shows that this was actually a premeditated attack. You know, obviously the perpetrator is no longer with us. He took his life shortly afterwards. But it is appearing that he went and intentionally bought the weapon he used to kill her, intentionally drove to the school to do so. There's that. But also there's a little bit of cynicism about the idea that somebody who is the headmaster of a very prestigious boys' school and before it a very prestigious, very religious school like this could just out of hand dismiss that there could be anything systemic. Because in the same way that we may talk about all male sporting clubs, and particularly some sporting codes, as often promoting a sort of, I know it's an overused phrase, but I'm going to use it, toxic masculinity, that finger is also often pointed at these kind of schools. It has been pointed out today by some journalists that Dr. Collier, while he was presiding at St Andrews, there was a teacher who was found guilty of taking upskirt pictures of girls, and he was suspended. But Dr. Collier wrote one of these newsletters, it's obviously something he does, saying that there should be compassion shown to him and his family. So not to defame the man, but to point out that we're all swimming in a certain soup. And I don't know, I'm not for 1 minute saying that that's what made this young man do what he did, but sort of dismissing it out of hand as a snap, out of character, all those things does kind of shrug off any kind of systemic issue that we might have with men in Australia, considering, as I say, this happens in every walk of life.
I came to this wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt because it's also a newsletter that was intended for a specific audience that has now been published to an entirely different audience. My initial irritation was, we're doing a lot of talk about the perpetrator and who he was and what kind of guy, what kind of life he lived, and no mention of the woman he murdered. And then I went, well, I can see that because he is writing to boys and parents of boys, he is a man grappling with how we avoid these sorts of crimes and what might be an explanation. One of the most chilling things I thought in the letter was the line about how now 2 young lives are destroyed in their prime. This is something I keep seeing. And there's a suggestion as well, which he's pulled out of thin air, there's no evidence for it, but that it could have been a psychotic break or whatever, which is really stigmatizing to people who live with mental illness, because a lot of people experiencing that don't go and, murder their ex-girlfriend. He then framed it as though there were 2 victims, equal victims.
Yeah.
There is one victim here who was senselessly murdered. Her family will never understand what happened. And not to say there is not pain that will be experienced by the family and friends of that man, but they were not killed by a natural disaster. There was someone who murdered the other. And I think that he missed that in that wording.
That's a line that you often hear when, like, at a school or something, someone's accused of rape and it goes to court and people talk about 2 young lives are ruined, meaning the victim and the perpetrator. And you're like, but only one of them had a choice in this situation.
Yes.
Even saying that and comparing them or grouping them together in any way, I can see how deeply offensive and distressing that is, even if, obviously he did not mean to cause that kind of distress. But I also think that it's easier for us to believe that someone is a monster, that someone had a psychotic break. He said he was not a monster, but then he said, maybe he had a psychotic break, maybe whatever. But some people just believe, and I remember saying this at the time, why do men think they can kill women? Why do some men think, I know what the answer is, I can kill her?
What does this do? What does the framing of someone as an otherwise good man, and people aren't doing this often to excuse a crime. My father has told this story many times of a kid he taught at school, gave him the religious prize, was lovely kid when he taught him, went off the next year, murdered his entire family in Sydney. God. That detail to my father is really interesting because he's like, I shook that kid's hand. Yeah. I looked him in the eye. Like, that's not because he's saying he didn't murder his family, but what do we do with the cognitive dissonance of walking through the world with what we think are kind, normal people, but then we also can't believe that they just had a bad 5 hours? Like, I don't understand how we're meant to reconcile this.
I think what it does is, as I said earlier about, I think that without necessarily intentionally meaning to, it does point to the idea that romantic sexual relationships can drive men wild and that they have no control in the face of manipulative, sexually desirable females.
But what if what that school principal said was absolutely true? Is it just that the detail is irrelevant and they shouldn't say it?
I don't agree that the detail is irrelevant. I think that it is relevant to know what kind of person does this kind of thing. And the reason that I think it's relevant is because it shows you that this is not the isolated space of a monster. In the article that I wrote about this, and I gave some life details of some of the women lost to violence this year, they're all from all kinds of backgrounds. And so the issue has to be, ultimately, it has to be an issue with what men are being taught about women from a very young age, all the way across society. And again, I don't want to be too, you're right, Jessie, that this was a newsletter taken out of context and he's a religious man from a religious school, but the throw-in suggestion that this might be to do with pornography, like that a man beat a woman to death in a toilet because of pornography, is a very morally loaded one. And I think that there's a question here about male role models and who's fit for purpose to be one in a very different age to the one that a man like this came up in. So I'm not arguing that I don't think we should examine who commits these murders. What I basically believe is this is a man's issue. This is a man's problem. It's always framed as a women's issue and a women's problem. It's not. It's a man's issue and a man's problem, and they've got to take hold of it and fix it. And in order to do that, they need to recognise that these are the guys who they drink with at the pub and play with on sporting teams and work within an office. They need to recognise that. And then they've got to figure out how to dismantle this hatred of women that is somehow implanted at all these different kinds of men.
Out loud, as you can read Holly's magnificent piece, we'll put a link in the show notes.
So shall I just start? Hello, I'm Louis Theroux.
Thank you for doing this.
No, it's an honour. I'm a huge, huge fan.
Oh, my God.
I realised that I had to pull back from all of this.
What, you stopped having any kinds of romantic and sexual encounters?
Rein the whole thing back.
Have you been in a celibate phase? Is that what you're saying?
For quite a while now.
For how long?
If I meet you, there are some questions I know not to ask. I won't ask you if you're pregnant, even if there's a baby dangling out of your parts.
Even if your water is broken on your shoes.
No,
you will not say,
Could be a wee.
I won't ask you if you're married or engaged or intend to be either of those unless the conversation turns in that direction. I won't ask you if you've had anti-wrinkle injections. I won't ask you if you've lost weight and how. And I may not even ask you where you're from. That's because I am polite, possibly over-anxious about causing offence, and a bit of a goody-goody. But I read an interview with everyone's favourite pretend intellectual boyfriend this week, Louis Theroux, where he suggests there is actually no such thing as a rude question, that you should be able to ask any question. I know obviously Louis Theroux is a journalist, and I'm not talking about in a professional context, because of course if I was interviewing someone about those things, I would ask them those things. But in everyday life context, he says there's no such thing as a rude question. What's rude is expecting an answer. So if you're going to go there with your "are you pregnant?" question, you have to be prepared for the fact that someone might just say, I'm not going to answer that question, and you have to not take offence about it. Now, I wanted to talk to Mia about this because, unlike me, she literally has no filter about asking questions. I've sat in all kinds of situations with Mia with people we don't know when she asks them all kinds of very personal questions.
And is it just me, Holly, or do you kind of like it because you wanted the answer too, but you would never ask it?
I kind of love it. But there's a bit of me that always goes,
yeah, and then in the background you go, Mia, and then you lean in and you're like, well.
Mia, do you agree with Louis?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really true. I think that just because someone asks you a question, you don't have to answer it.
How awkward is that?
You kind of do. I think it's part of the social contract. When was the last time someone asked you a question and you felt empowered enough to go, I'm not going to answer that question?
I guess I'm more talking about in an interview sense. So there's two different sides of me. There's obviously my work side where I get to literally, I've got a microphone in front of me and license to ask whatever I want. Although I do always say to the people I interview on No Filter, before we start, is there something that I would ask you that make you would feel sick if I brought it up? And that to me is always important because I need them to feel safe in that space. And if they are like, oh, she's about to ask the gotcha question. And I always say there's no gotcha questions. I've got nothing written down in front of me because I know what it's like to be interviewed and be dreading that a subject's coming up. And I've learned that if someone's got that tension, they'll never be able to relax into the interview. But as soon as you take something off the table, and 99 times out of 100, people say, no, it's fine. Ask me whatever. And then occasionally they'll say something and it was not at all what you were thinking about.
Yeah,
not at all what you would have thought of. And so you go, oh, I wasn't going to ask it. So immediately you can give them their reassurance. But it's how you ask it. And I've learned a lesson from Lee Sales. She says, if you say to somebody, this might be too personal and you don't have to answer it, you can then ask anything. And it also gives them a little stepping off platform to not answer it without going, well, that's none of your business.
Yeah.
They can just go, I probably just don't really want to talk about that.
Do you reckon there's a way of using that in everyday life?
Yeah, just use those words.
I saw it happen on the weekend. So I am exactly as you say, Holly, to a fault. I actually think sometimes someone drops something in and they would like me to ask about it, but because I am such a people pleaser and so terrified of offending people, I don't go there, and that's actually not the kindest thing I could do for this person. So on the weekend, I was having a conversation with someone and she brought up that she was diagnosed with cancer in her mid-20s. And I had no idea what to do. My instinct was, what cancer? Are you okay? Like, I had 100 questions. I was genuinely interested, but I went through all these things and I went, no, that's really rude. I can't ask. And then this other person I was with, who is more socially adept than I am, she asked a question and then she said, I totally understand if you don't want to talk about this, by the way. And it was so relaxed. And this person said, actually, I really like talking about it. And we went from there, and it meant that the quality of the conversation was elevated and it was really interesting. I would have just been in total fear that entire time that I'd overstepped a boundary.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, now you say that, I can picture that in real life because I've done it before with a friend of mine who, for example, I know has just had a big loss. And I know that I can't see them without bringing it up, but I also don't want them to feel like they have to tell me the whole story again and this is what happened and this is how it played out. So I might say, you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I was really sorry to hear about your loss.
I think the other thing that matters, which you touched on, Mia, where it's coming from. So the reason that Louis gets away with it and he can ask anyone anything is because it is genuinely coming from a place of curiosity. If I sit down with a new group of people and someone comments or asks, asks a question about my weight, we're not there yet. Like the intimacy isn't there. I don't know if it's coming from a place of curiosity or if it's a place of judgment.
Possibly ask you
You've
about
got
your
to
weight.
build intimacy before someone can say, have you lost your baby weight?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
Oh.
like that sort of thing. Like, it's a presumptuous comment in a lot of ways. And then I feel like I have to talk about, like, that would be really awkward if I'm in a new situation and then I have to go, actually, I'm not comfortable talking about
But I would
this.
never ask you that. And I ask you everything.
I know.
But you know when you said you don't ask questions, that can come across as you just not being interested.
Exactly.
So I just assume that you're just not interested in knowing anything about me. Mostly because I don't give any people enough time to ask questions. I just put the information out there before.
Are there any questions you don't ask when you first meet people? Not in an interview situation, in real life. You do often go in with like,
feed in.
Have you got a partner?
So
you this,
in all,
that?
100%. So in all seriousness, my neurodiversity, ADHD, that's a real problem because I have literally no filter. Like, I called that podcast that as a joke, but then that's actually what ADHD, it doesn't manifest in everybody that way, but it manifests in some people, manifests in me that way, that my family always say thoughts just fall out of my mouth. Literally no filter. They pop into my head and fall out of my mouth. And the ones that I've learned, because I don't lack self-awareness, I do sometimes in understanding what's appropriate and what's not. But I know if I ask a question and I'll see the look on someone's face, like I'm not oblivious. And the question that I've learned to be so careful of is around asking people about children. I just have learned to be very, very careful. And I've had to apologise a couple of times when I've just forgotten and asked, oh, have you got kids? And they'll be like, no. And so particularly women in their 30s and early 40s. You just got to be super careful.
See,
so I ask around it. I'll find a way and I'll try to work it out, but I won't directly put them in the spot of having to say, because you know there's always a story there.
Here's a good one. Asking someone how old they are. A woman I did not know asked me really directly a while ago, like I did not know her, how old I was in a public situation with a lot of other people. I was so uncomfortable.
Really?
I was so uncomfortable.
So you don't hang up about that.
I do, but also, you know, I don't want to play that. Like, you know, it's such a cliched stereotype. Never ask a lady her age. But I was like, I don't know you. Yeah. But then if you refuse to answer that question in a public situation, you look like the biggest arsehole ever. So I think I like muttered it. I was like, I'm 51.
Yeah.
And
which is why I think
people their age.
Yeah. I try to normalize things like I ask people if they've had anti-wrinkle injections. The other thing I've learned to not ask, although you can ask people who are close to you, but if they're on weight loss injections.
Oh, I would never.
No,
I would never ask anyone.
Of course you wouldn't, but of course I would.
So how do you feel if they refuse to answer? Because the point of this is that Louis is saying you can ask, but I do not have to answer. So if I just say, I'm not telling you that, are you offended? Are you going to push me? Are you going to
then I know that you are. Then I know that you are.
Oh, that's
see, it's a trap.
No, I agree. So therefore, you just lie. Like if you don't want to tell someone something, it's awkward if they say, how old are you?
But then you're making someone lie.
No, I know. It's awful. It's terrible.
I reckon that you've got to be very cognizant of the dynamics. For example, like you might have those free-flowing conversations with people. This is an awful way to discuss it, but where in a setting people might be considered equal. But if you have power over someone and you're asking them something inappropriate, then I don't think—
job interview. It's why I don't do a lot of job interviews anymore.
They're probably not empowered enough to say I'm not comfortable answering that, and it can kind of trap them a bit. But I reckon that I am the opposite of you to an absolute fault, because it can look like a lack of curiosity when I've actually just prosecuted. One time someone was offended by that and, you know, I don't want to go rummaging in their grief and blah, blah, blah. And then you say nothing, which I think is probably the worst of both worlds. So I don't know. I have to be better at just taking a risk.
I want to know out loud as what questions you wouldn't answer and whether you would feel confident just saying, not answering that.
If you want to make Out Loud part of your routine 5 days a week, we release segments on Tuesdays and Thursdays just for Mamamia subscribers. To get full access, follow the link in the show notes, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers. Guys, I'm back, and I've technically been away from paid work for the longest time since I was 14, which is 18 years. And it's weird. In the meeting, you two said, let's do a segment on what these 4 months have been like. And I was very worried that everyone would just find it really boring, which I think says a lot about our cultural appreciation or not for caring for people at home.
Well, in defense of people who might find it boring, like I think that's one of the biggest challenges without telling you how you felt. But like for a lot of women, it is boring but also exhausting, intense, a million things,
I didn't expect
but also boring.
The self-consciousness of when people say, how is it, how's your baby? Maybe it's because you know you could go on for 3 days. And so you go, to anyone else, this is really boring. So I'm just going to give you this really condensed answer. And it's weird because maybe I don't feel like that about work. Maybe I feel like there's more of a respected chat to be had about work with a bunch of people, but when it's about your kid, you don't want to go on and on. I don't know.
Well, that's because we've all heard all the, stop talking about your baby memes and like, blah, blah, mums are so boring.
Exactly. I've really internalized that. And so what I thought I would do is put together the 4 things that surprised me the most while I was away. And then I added a few like quick fire dot points at the end of just tiny little things that I need to mention this. Okay?
Okay.
Can I ask how you feel just like being dressed, being out of the house? And you might get to this, but like I glanced at you across the office before. You were in a meeting this morning. You were sitting at a desk.
I feel really weird. I feel like I never left, and then I feel like I've been gone for 10 years. It's really weird. I keep saying I feel ambivalent about it, but what I mean is like I'm excited to be back, but my heart is also like broken a little bit. Leaving, I didn't expect it to be so hard leaving her this morning. And you know, people talk about work coming back and it being hard. I didn't really understand why, but it's because I want to be in two places at once. Like I want to be here and I also want to be there. And it's, you know, this is just the beginning and you guys have told me this 100 times, but it's
okay. You're still allowed to say it. Everybody has to experience it for themselves.
Oh, it's
if
bloody
indeed
hard.
they do experience it.
Number one thing, which maybe Mia told me, but it surprised me anyway because you think you're listening to everyone's advice, but really you're going, it'll be different for me. Number one, the fun. So much fun. So much fun to be had. So much laughter and cuddles. Out louders know I hate to sing and dance, but I have done more singing and dancing in the last 2 months.
She's unlocked your joy level.
What's your go-to song?
The Happy Song, which is by Imogen Heap. It's a song that's allegedly designed to make a baby stop crying, and we just know every word and we sing it, we make noises. She loves it. I remember I was thinking about this the other day. I was doing laps when I was at the very end of my pregnancy and I thought, this is the last time I'll ever do laps. I'll never be able to do laps again. And I thought about it today and I was like, you can do laps tomorrow if you want. Like all the fun things are still there. I think I saw birth as an end rather than a beginning where all these other fun things would exist.
When did she start getting fun for you?
I thought she was fun on day one.
What was the fun part?
And my mum did tell me this. She said, you will not believe how many hours you can sit there staring at a baby's face and the time just disappears. And I found that really fun. And I wonder, because in my mother's group, there are some people who are taking a year and some people taking 6 months. And maybe because I knew I was going to come back, it's been this intense situation of appreciating how quickly this is all going to go. So maybe it's been easier for me to look at it and try and savor every moment because I know I'm going back to work. I don't know if I had another year, if I would have been able to do that and maybe monotony and a few things would have set in. But it's just been so fun. And I think with Luca as well, he's someone who, you know, is not necessarily into babies and was, I think, quite anxious. And to see him turn into this whole other person who has his own fun with her. And often I'll be holding her through the airport yesterday and she was asleep on my shoulder and Luca just kept turning around with tears in his eyes going, I'm going to cry because she's just so cute.
Oh, God, stop.
Anyway, makes you insane.
I love it.
Number 2, you get the baby you get. And I learnt this in night 2 of the hospital and people can say sleep training and this and that and the temperament of a baby comes out with that baby. And I've seen that just in the groups that I've been a part of and stuff. Luna is a very placid, relaxed.
And yet alert.
Very alert, very, very smart. Oh, she's so smart.
She's so
smart.
Oh, my God.
She's so clever.
I'm
You've
going to
just
write a
never seen
thesis
anything
about
like
this.
it.
She's so smart.
There's this thing
I'm
called
not interested in
projection,
babies, but she's really
my
smart.
friends. And I said this to Claire Stevens because your value system is
smart.
If your value system was cute, she would. I mean, she is cute too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not saying your baby isn't cute, but you know what I mean. But your
my
value
She's not
system is
too smart, but she's so smart.
My
She's
value
smart
system
enough.
is also clothes.
Yes. She's just like looking at that as in what I'm saying is that I was speaking to someone over the weekend who said she had this baby that cried 14 hours a day with silent reflux.
Yeah.
And people talk about relaxed parents and helicopter parents and all that kind of stuff. I know I've only been doing it for 4 months, but I think your parenting style is just a response to the child you get.
That's interesting.
I wonder if you get a certain child, if you are given a child that cries for 14 hours a day, you cannot be the super chill parent who just like puts the baby down and lets the baby be held by everyone.
100%.
Like I think we put all this pressure on mothers to be this certain type of mum.
So what you're saying, there's not a lot that you can do that will change the baby.
No, and this is baby. I don't know if it's different with like a 5 or 10-year-old, although I think personality is very much, and Holly, you were saying this recently, you do not know who they're going to turn out to be.
You
just
do not
foster that. But all the pressure we put on parents, I just think that there's a lot of like, oh, you have a baby that's sleep. I haven't done anything that makes me have a baby that's good at naps.
No, it's true.
Yeah, it's completely random.
Babies are pretty random.
You'll discover that if you have more than one.
Yes, it's a totally different
because they can come out different. But yeah, anyway, we don't want to get into the whole like whether or not you can have any influence on your child's temperament
Nature,
and
nurture.
nature. I think you can. But anyway,
You know what? At 4 months, I think that
and
period.
also and the fact that it's a luck of the draw a lot about because clearly the things that affect your quality of life the most in those early days of parenting are whether they feed and whether they sleep and whether they cry a lot.
How are your nips?
Well, that was my point number 3. I can't remember if we can swear on this podcast, but I've written fucking feeding
Yes.
is a thing that's very hard. And everyone tells you and you think, How hard can it be?
You shove a nipple in baby's mouth, baby feed.
It feeds. And this is the thing. Nipple went in, baby latched, milk came out. I was like, I am the best breastfeeder.
Nailing it.
I have a perfect baby. I am perfect. Maybe it's because we are both.
What is this self-esteem that Jessie Stephens has?
And I looked at my baby and I went, well, it's because you're so smart. You're such a good feeder. Well, then she gets weighed. Oh, she's lost weight. How has she lost weight? I've been feeding her 10 times a day. Then we do the supplement, the pump. And people know this. Like when you're feeding 10 to 12 times a day and then in between you are pumping, it is 24 hours a day making the milk.
Cow.
And you are just shoving it in this baby's mouth and then you go and weigh them again and they've put on like 30 grams and everyone's panicking and you're going, I'm no mathematician, but the milk going, I don't know what's happening. And so even now, she's 4 months old. She is like average length, average head, all of that. But our last doctor's appointment, they used the term failure to thrive and the extent to which that broke my heart because you think you've got one job to fatten them up and it's not happening and you feel like
bad cow,
terrible cow. So I didn't expect how emotional that would be.
Such a bad term.
Such a bad term. I would like to cancel that term. It is the worst term
failure
ever.
To thrive.
Just anything else, please.
They should just call it little baby.
Yeah, little baby.
Little baby.
Before she gets bigger.
Tiny
She's
baby.
on her way to
I
biggerness.
remember those days. Billy was so tiny and I used to take him to the weigh-in at the chemist and I'd take him like every day and she was like, you need to stop coming every day.
I had to.
You're only allowed to come once a week.
Get out.
And I'd be like, but he's not. And she'd be like, oh my God.
We have a photo. I became so obsessed with weighing her. We have a photo of getting out the kitchen scales and getting out a chip bowl and putting the baby in the chip bowl and being like, has she put on any weight?
I hear you, sister.
I thought it said 5 kilos. It said error. It's the whole thing. The fourth one is the joy that they bring to the whole world outside of you. So my dad, who has, had a stroke and had a rough few years, totally different person. Like seeing the joy it's brought to Claire and Mia and Jason and all the aunties and uncles and
even the out louders.
Babies make people happy.
They make people so happy.
They
and
actually
even,
maybe make other people more happy than they make their parents because often you are dealing with, no, you're not, but often you're dealing with sleep deprivation, anxiety, all these health issues that babies bring. No one else is. They're just going, cute baby, let me cuddle.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's just so simple in a world that's complicated and polarizing.
And angry. And
Luca brought her over the other day. He lay her down and there were 6 of us, including 3 teenagers, just all looking at her and just laughing.
It gives you something to do, doesn't it? It's just like, even going to my parents, it's like, you don't really have to look for conversation at points. You're just like, look at her, she's looking at the fan. And everyone just looks at the fan and the baby. Like that's our whole lives now. Quick fire. Postpartum bleeding, fucked. No one can warn you for how fucked that is. Mia bought me like big black underpants and she said, you need to throw these in the bin after you're done. And I was like, Mia, that's so wasteful. No, they needed to go in the bin with what I did to those underpants.
It's a lot of blood. What does Ali Wong say? The baby comes out, but then all her furniture comes out as well.
It's not right.
I've really forgotten about all that.
Yeah, the warnings I've given Claire. I want 100 babies. I didn't expect that.
Oh,
yes, please.
I would like 100.
How many are you going to have? Oh, that's the question you shouldn't ask.
I definitely want another one.
Just one more.
I want heaps, but then it's like, how do you?
Oh, there's just more love.
Yeah, I think I'll have 500. Okay.
500.
The whole sleep when the baby sleeps. I was always like, why aren't we napping more? We're at home. We're chilling. I understand now. It cannot be done. I have not taken one nap because there is no time to take naps because once you go to sleep, the baby wakes up.
Isn't it weird to try and explain to someone why it's so busy looking after a baby?
It's really weird.
New parents are like, I don't even have time to shower. And like even me, I've lived through that twice and now I can't really remember why it's like that. But it just is.
It just is.
Yeah.
It's like I haven't eaten today. I don't know why. I just haven't had 2 hands at all.
Yeah. When I'm looking after her, Jessie or Luca will text for updates. And I won't look at my phone or even know where it is for 3 hours. I'm like,
wow, that is very
I'm too busy. There's too much to be done.
I love that for
stimulation.
You. Yeah. This is good. That's good. It's great. It's
good
very
for me.
focus in the moment focus.
It's like a fidget toy, but
a live one. Is that what you wanted to hear about your daughter? Anyway,
yes,
go on.
She's like a fidget toy. Last 2 I had was growing up as a feminist, read a lot of feminist literature. I read something over the weekend that it was in the Financial Review and the sentence was, it's hard to argue that child minding is anything other than boring. And I was like, I completely disagree. I feel like feminism downplayed motherhood a little bit.
That's me
as
fault.
Just drudgery.
She always says how boring it is.
I don't find it boring. I think it's a privilege and I love it. Again, I only have a 4-month-old. Ask me when I have a 2.5-year-old who's screaming. And lastly, we're going to talk about this more in a subs episode or something, but I have, for some reason, had this death anxiety thing come up. You know, people talk about anxiety and it latches to different things, and some people look at the baby and go, something awful is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think about death 100 times a day. It's very, very strange. But
your death?
Particularly mine.
Yes, I got that after I had kids.
Yes.
I suddenly felt, and this is a terrible thing to say out loud, but I suddenly was like, well, I can't die now.
Yes, yes.
Because who?
What, like you wanted to before?
Well, but
no, just like it didn't matter.
I would be like if I was hit by a car, or suddenly the implications of your own demise seem to be enormous. It's a controversial thing to say because it makes it sound like you're saying, if you don't have kids, who cares if you're here or not?
Which is completely wrong. Yeah,
but it's like in your mind, you've just taken this shift where you're like, oh, and I became really paranoid around roads, and it's weird.
Yeah, I feel like I could die at any second.
We're going to do a whole episode about that.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Subscribe to Mamamia and listen to us talk about death.
Oh, Jessie is brilliant. For people who do want more Jessie maternity leave content, we're going to do a subs episode where basically Mia and I are going to compete for who gave her the best advice.
I've been giving a lot of feedback because you had very different strategies on how to do things.
Yeah, we did. But otherwise, we're just happy you're here. It's lovely. Claire's been amazing, don't get me wrong. This is one of those things where you're like, if I'm happy to have you back. Claire's amazing, but we love having our Jessie back. Welcome back. Mia, you've got a quick recommendation before we go.
I do. It is a book that has landed once again at the most perfect time. Julia Baird is a best-selling author, columnist, host of The Drum on the ABC. She wrote a book called Phosphorescence that came out during the pandemic that became an absolute bestseller.
It won every single award that a book could win.
Sold a bajillion copies, which is amazing because if someone just told you like, oh, this book, it's kind of about glowy things in the ocean, which isn't what it was about, but you know, and wonder and awe, you'd be like, yep, it went bananas.
Because it was a text that met its moment.
So glorious.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and I think this one has too.
Yes.
I don't know how she preempts where the world will be at when her book is written.
But someone should.
It's the most extraordinary timing. So her new book is called Bright Shining, How Grace Changes Everything. And Out Louders, we know, and you know that we know, that it's a very, very brutal time in the world at the moment. We are distressed. We know you are distressed. It can be really hard to see the light sometimes. And this book is about seeing the light. Julia went through, she's been battling cancer for quite a long time. Last year was particularly dire. And she also lost her mum. But this book isn't about her particularly.
I just had the
never
impulse to ask how old Julia Baird is. Am I allowed to ask that? Can you just give me a ballpark?
I reckon Jules is 50. No, I went to her 50th a few years ago. I reckon she's 53.
Sorry
52.
if that was rude, Julia.
It's not rude. Okay. She is grateful for every year that she has. She writes about grace. She talks about how it's one of the most mysterious but necessary human qualities. It's both mysterious and hard to find. It can be found when we create ways to find meaning and dignity in connection with each other, building on our shared humanity, being kinder, bigger, better with each other. If, in its crudest interpretation, karma is getting what you deserve, then grace is the opposite, forgiving the unforgivable, favouring the undeserving, loving the unlovable.
I read that incredible excerpt that was in the Sydney Morning Herald about her ex. That Morgan. Was fascinating.
So Jules lost a guy she'd broken up with. They'd had a really long relationship and they'd broken up about 2 years earlier, and he died in a plane crash. He was a journalist. She talks about the hierarchy of grief, but it's the most uplifting, beautiful book. Buy it as a gift. Buy it for yourself. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And if you're looking for something else to listen to, on last week's subscriber episode, Holly and Mia said goodbye to my beautiful, wonderful twin sister, Claire Stephens, who's about to go on maternity leave. Holly and Mia asked her to reflect on her time on Out Loud.
She did.
Interestingly, she's gone on mat leave. She doesn't give a fuck. So she just went, you know what? I'm going to tell you bitches exactly what I think.
Feedback was exchanged.
And it was a bit of an exit interview. I was struck and confronted by the honesty shared. So if you want to know how Claire's exit interview went, it's recorded. Go and listen to last week's subscription episode.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
A link to that will be in our show notes.
Thank you for listening to Australia's #1 news and pop culture show. This episode was produced by Emeline Gazilas with audio production by Leah Porges. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.